Good morning, everyone. Welcome here to the SanDisk Speaker Series. Thank you very much for coming to this morning's events. We have a very special guest here with us today, Marie Perruchet, and one of the co-founders of One Perfect Pitch, former BBC journalist, who's covered everything from European politics to San Francisco technology. A couple of housekeeping things to keep in mind. Please silence your cell phones. As well as you all received a survey before you entered, so please, we do ask you to fill that out at the conclusion of today's presentation. So please help me welcome Marie Perruchet.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Guy, for giving me the opportunity to spread the word about storytelling at SanDisk. Is the mic functioning? Yeah. So I'm very glad to be here because we share the same colors with the logo, so I feel I'm really welcome. So today we're going to talk about storytelling. I'd like you, that's my ambition today, to have a better understanding of what is storytelling, and hopefully get you ready for your next presentation. Who has a presentation this afternoon? Yes, I see one hand, two hands, few hands. So you're going to get today, in the next 45 minutes or so, a set of tools that you'll be using this afternoon to be a better storyteller. I was with a European executive a while ago. He came to One Perfect Pitch because he wanted to improve his storytelling. His problem was that he did an interview with the press, and he complained to us that the press didn't quote him in the article. So I said, okay, let's go through the questions again. Tell me, what happened. And he told me, she asked me how I found a job in this company. It's a technology company in the Bay Area, very famous. And he told her, I was on holidays in California, in Silicon Valley. I called the company, they got me an interview, and I got the job. Of course, the journalist didn't believe him. She said he was on message. So why his story didn't work? Because he didn't give enough details. He didn't talk about the struggle, the turning points that made him get this job. And why it's so important to say that? It's because even if his experience is very unique, it's about one person, you can turn it in a very universal story that exemplifies you, your values, the company, what are the values of the company. And that's what storytelling about. Exemplifying the values of your company, talking about the turning point so that the person can connect with what you say. So that is storytelling. And what I wanted to tell you today, if you have some time to read this quote, is that storytelling tells you about humans. It tells you about people. And companies all over the world are going through change of products, through new releases of products. And that's why storytelling is very useful to use. And the one thing I'd like you to remember about storytelling today is that it's about true experiences, real life experiences. It has to come from the heart. And when you're managing to tell in an authentic way what happened to your products, to your services, to your company, that you're able to communicate those values, people will be able to relate, and you will be able to engage this audience. Engage the audience, but also give them the sounds, the bits, and the sound bites to tell your story afterwards. It's not only about communicating a message, but it's giving them the opportunity to tell it to others. During meetings, in front of clients, in front of partners, all the time. But it has to be simple. It has to talk about people. It has to talk about struggles. I'd like to briefly introduce me and tell you how my past experiences shaped the way I approach storytelling today. I was born in South Korea, raised in France. I come from Normandy. And you know, in Normandy, it's all about castles, churches, and caves. I come from Alençon, which is on the northwest part of France. And I have a video for you, a few seconds, that will show you how it looks like. So castles, churches, and caves. When you grow up in that environment, you want to know about stories. You want to read fairy tales. And actually fairy tales, it was born in France in the 17th century, when at the court, Charles Perrault, the famous folk tailor, was telling story to the court, to people to entertain them. Have you ever visited this place in France, in Normandy, called Bayeux? Anyone? Yes, I see a few hands. There's this beautiful tapestry that actually depicts, it's from the 11th century, depicts the story of the conquest of England. And it's one of the first living proofs of how storytelling was used to depict human quests, struggles. You can see some details here. It's a very, very nice show. I was reading stories, reading a lot of fairy tales, and all stories, they start with the once upon a time. There's a setting, you're talking about the details, you're talking about what is going to happen. So the audience is expecting something. And every time you're telling a story, you're doing a presentation, you need, to set up that ground, that foundation for people to, get your attention. Stories, why they fascinated me, because they were about people, real people. And as one of the psychiatrists put it, Bruno Bettelheim, who wrote The Uses of Enchantment in 1975, called otherwise Psychanalyse des contes de fées, he said that stories were actually empowering children to understand about the real world and serve them as an identification tool. And today, when you're telling stories for adults, it's the same. You have this identification with the hero, you feel the struggles, you feel the turning points, and then you vouch for the person. So when you're telling the story about a product, about a service, that's what you have to do. And as he put it, many fairy tales begin with the death of the mother or father. And that's how Cinderella's story starts. About the ashes, her mom died, and Cinderella, the first story of Cinderella goes back to the 8th century in China. So I was passionate about fairy tales because they would tell me about my world, and I wanted to check the settings of those fairy tales. So I became a journalist. I worked in Belgium for the French radio. I worked in India, in New Delhi, and in Shanghai. And today I'd like to share with you what you can learn from journalists. So how do journalists think? They think in terms of angles. Many times I was approached by companies and they would tell me, oh, can you write about us? No, of course not. I need something, I need a bit, I need an angle that will tell me which direction should I follow. So journalists think in terms of angle. And when you're presenting, you cannot throw too much information. You need to pick one idea that you will deploy around your presentation. Journalists think in terms of hook, because imagine we're writing our pieces, we're speaking, and at the same time, maybe 10,000 miles away, you're brushing your teeth, you're driving, you're speaking to your boss, to your kids, so you don't have much attention to give us. So from the very first seconds, we need to capture your attention. And how do articles work? You start with, let's say there's a fire, okay, a fire happening in Yosemite. You're not starting your article by saying how the fire started. You started to talk about the situation. What is the rescue team doing? What's the current situation? So when you're presenting, start with what is current in your presentation. And the third thing that I've learned being a journalist is that we have to think about our audience. Of course, when you start, you're more thinking about the judgment of your editor. But after a while, you're thinking, no, I have to write for my audience. Is the newspaper, left or right wing? Is it more of a magazine? What is the length of the piece? So managing your time, knowing who you're talking to, and I think one of you mentioned it in the survey that we sent, what's in for my audience? Because the show, it's not about you, it's about the audience. What's in for them? Why should they care? And most of the time, the clients I've worked with, they're so deep into their project that they have some difficulties taking some perspective and forgetting about the true purpose of their presentation. I came to America 6 years ago, 4 days prior to the American elections. And when I came, I realized that storytelling was everywhere. It was used by President Barack Obama, and as he says it, when he's reflecting about his first term, storytelling is really central. I let you watch this video. Okay. So it's about telling, 1, 2, 3. It's about telling a story. A story as it used to be told in those Lascaux paintings. If you've been to the southwestern part of France, you have approximately 6,000 paintings, back to the 12,000 years old. I will show you a video that explains it.
Is the largest painting in the cave of 16 feet from the top of the wall to the tip of the tail.
The guide explains that this 600-animal multi-cave composition was the work of a complex society, the Magdalenians. Their culture allowed for skilled artists to work over an extended period of time in this sacred place.
They fix maybe on the walls a dream, a myth, a knowledge, and the image will be able to across generations. The image becomes the memory of the society. The art of Lascaux is supposed to be around 17,000 years old. But compared to the beginning of the humanity, which was born in Africa 3 million years ago, Lascaux it was yesterday. They were like us.
So you working at SanDisk today, I would like you to think about the stories. So how SanDisk was born? Do you know about the anecdotes, the experiences the founders went through? Do you know about the history of your current products, and how much are you able to tell those stories to your peers, to your bosses, not only to communicate the values of the company, but also sometimes to get support for an idea, to get some funding, or to sell. So what's your story? Your MBA won't help, because storytelling, it's about people, it's about experiences, it's about trigger points, it's about communicating those experiences. And it's not being taught in business schools. It's not being taught at school, except for young kids, show and tell, but after 6 years old, they tend to forget. So your MBA won't help. Yet, I hear all those complaints. It's the same ever again. There's no story, too much jargon, there's no point, you're not conveying your message in a very clear way. How can you do that today? How can you tell a good story that will captivate an audience? And I wanted to share with you a scientific discovery. There's this neuroeconomist called Paul Zak. He did a study with people when working at the university. And what he discovered is that when you inject oxytocin to people artificially, they get more empathic. They get more empathy for other people, and they give more money, for example, in that experience. So when you're telling a story, it activates that part of the brain that generates oxytocin. That's why storytelling is working. So today, SanDisk and storytelling. What can you do? What tools? Now we've been talking about storytelling. What tools, what techniques can you use on a daily basis? Because I think most of you are presenting every week. You have people presenting on a daily basis, some just a couple of times per year. Which tools can you use to tell better stories? And what is the purpose of telling better stories? Any suggestions? Why do you want to tell better stories? Yes, inform. What else? Yes. Conclusion, yes. Funding, right. Any other ideas? Yes, goal, purpose. Yes, so that's what you want to do when you're telling a story. You want to do all that. But how do you do? Today I wanted to bring you through the journey of a good communicator. There are different steps, and I tried my best to make it simple. Everything is in my book that I'll be publishing next year with McGraw-Hill, but today I wanted to give you the tools that you can use right away this afternoon after the presentation. So the journey of a good communicator has 3 steps. The first one has to do with preparation. The second is about crafting the story. And the third, it's about practice. And do you know which one of those ones are the most overlooked? Yes, practice. Second, preparation, exactly. And third, it's crafting. And I've read some of you, in the survey, ask me, how can I get quickly to building a story? But unfortunately, it takes some time. It takes practice, it takes preparation, so homework, and it takes crafting. Okay, so let's go through those 3 points. Because what I want you to remember, it's not only, all the purposes that I've shown you before. It's about giving a story to somebody that will tell it afterwards. So how do you make it simple for them? And I wanted to show you an example of a story that I really like. It's about the GoPro cameras. So this is the CEO, Nick Woodman. It's an interview made by Forbes. And I want to show you that how much he's painting the details, how much he's starting with a hook that conveys a really good story.
For inspiration, I went surfing, and I planned a 5-month surf trip around Australia and Indonesia. The inspiration came before I even left. I wanted to capture photos of myself and my friends that I was going on the trip with while we were surfing out in the water. And no camera existed that allowed you to do that. And so I set out to develop this wrist harness that I could put a single-use disposable camera into and surf with it. I didn't even mean it to be a business idea. I just wanted to document my experience on this trip. And as soon as I got it working well, the light bulb went off and I realized, oh my God, there must be so many other surfers in the world that want something like this.
So you started with wrist straps, essentially. But how do you go from wrist straps, which are very simple, to hardware, and to actually developing a camera?
I wanted to use higher quality cameras with my wrist strap to capture higher quality photos. But every camera that I would use with the strap, surfing, I would break the camera because cameras weren't designed to be used during rigorous activities like surfing. And what I ended up doing was I spent 2 years going to trade shows, the camera trade shows around the world, to look for a camera that was close to what I would want to design. After a year and a half, about a year, I found it. And got the manufacturer to agree to make the modifications building the cameras for me. I actually did the deal without ever meeting the actual company. It was all email. I had one phone call where we could barely understand each other because of language barrier. We were here in Shenzhen. I wired my $5,000 for the tool the mold to be made, because it was actually cheaper just to wire $5,000 than to fly over there, meet them, have a business trip, and I just figured, okay, we'll just go for it, and they ended up being legitimate.
So why does this CEO is conveying so much authenticity? Because he's painting pictures. And you see his trip, you see, the $5,000 that he sent, he was worried, and how, the surfing, of course the image is behind help, but you see him. That's how you convey authenticity. So we're going to talk about the preparation. What are the classic mistakes that you're doing when you're preparing your story? You're thinking too much about yourself. It's about the audience. It's about the other person, what's in for the audience, why should they care about what I say? What can you do about that? Think about them. You're giving overwhelming information, not only about the content, but also in the slides. Death by PowerPoint, I've seen that many times. Too much information. And it's not because you're going to give more that you're going to be more persuasive. It's just because the brain cannot take so much information and cannot process so much information at the same time. So you have to make it simple for people. And you have to focus on the problem that you're solving for the person. Right away, that's how you're captivating their attention. They want to know about that. That's the problem they're facing. That's how we're going to resolve it. Cut to the chase. The third mistake I see in preparation is that persons are conveying too many points. It has no progression. You're going over too many messages. But if you're thinking, what's the one message that you want to convey, it gets much more simple. What is the one key takeaway you want to convey? Let's talk about the crafting. And that's the structure of the storytelling that is very, very important. And it starts with the hook. The problem is that people are taking so much time to get to the point that you start to get sleepy. I hope you're not getting sleepy today. They start to think about something else, and you don't want them to think about something else. What do? They start asking questions. And I've seen that in the survey that you sent. Some of you mentioned that you were being interrupted, and I think this has to do with that. You're not getting to the point fast enough. So you have to hook your audience quickly, and you have only a few seconds to do so, because we all have short attention spans. We have social media. We have we are checking our Twitter, our Facebook at the same time. We're thinking about our next meeting, our next meal. And I wanted to show you two examples of how to hook an audience. The first one is from Anderson Cooper, a commencement speech he did at Tulane University. It's a great way to start a presentation.
Thank you very much for inviting me here to speak on this incredibly special day. I must admit, I was kind of nervous about what I would say here today. And then I began to think back to my own graduation from college 21 years ago. And I realized that I have absolutely no memory of actually graduating college. I mean, I know I did graduate college because I am constantly hounded by the Alumni Association, which, by the way, starting tomorrow, you will be as well.
So starting a speech with humor. And why do you want your hook to be strong? It's to survive for the next hour. So you captivate the audience, and then you can survive for the next hour, or the next 2 hours, or the next half hour. You can do that. You can also start with a statement, as in this video. Okay, so that's a way. Questions, humor, trying to relate as much as possible with the audience. So that's the hook. The second part of crafting a story, the second part that is very important is having a structure. So a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And every time you're speaking, you have to think about that to show that your thoughts are structured and the person knows what to expect. But most of the presentations, they don't have any structure. So what you can do about it is identifying the turning points in your story, and then you're waking people up. It's about that. Every time something changes. And most of the presentations that I've seen, we've worked with, they have no ending. So what's your ask at the end? What do you want from the person? What do you want from the audience? If you don't give them any recommendations or steps to do or askings, you're leaving the person in a state of insecurity and they don't know what to do, and it's a missed opportunity to get your point across. So what is your recommendation? Let's talk about the last part, which is practice. In the survey, I've read few of you telling me about too much technical words, jargon. It's not because you're in the same field, you're speaking the same language, that you should overlook about giving some context, giving some background about what you're doing. Never assume that. And as journalists, when we write articles, even with conflicts that happened or started 60, 70 years ago, we always start with the facts, giving some bits for the person to understand what's going on. The second part you can do to avoid the second, simplifying, trying to bring background and simplifying the context. The second mistake that happens in practice, it's the tendency to think that the more you put, the more complicated, the smarter it will look like. But here, this person from a TED Talk, who's a British agent.
American movies have only 2/3 the dialogue of European movies. And this is really important because it means that movies can communicate to audiences who don't have a high level of education. Then there's the question of dialogue. American movies have only 2/3 the dialogue of European movies. And this is really important because it means that movies can communicate to audiences who don't have a high level of education, who aren't even literate. I can explain why in more detail, but I'm not going to because I'm going to run out of time. The other thing that American movies do is they tell their stories much more visually because they aren't using dialogue. So they think almost in storyboards. And this is important for a very simple psychological reason. We believe what we see. We don't believe what we hear. And in fact, a really clever script will sometimes have dialogue contradicting what you're seeing because it makes the audience wake up, and instead of leaning back as a passive spectator, they will lean forward as an active participant in the process of watching your film. We can do that. The other thing we can do, but we don't, is shorter scenes. I was told by a company that does dubbing and subtitling that American movies, on average, have scenes half the length of European movies. It's a huge difference. Now, if you have your scenes, you cut the beginning and the end of every scene out without taking out anything that's critical to the understanding of the film. You leave a gap, and the audience will fill in that gap. And in doing so, it makes them feel good. They are actively watching your film instead of passively watching it.
So it's about simplifying your message because you want the audience to remember as much as possible of what you're telling them. The second mistake that people are doing when they're not practicing is reciting. So the brain can process 800 words per minute. But when we're speaking, the fastest we can speak is only 240 words. And an average American speaker says 145 words per minute. So if you want to establish, credibility, if you want to talk about the context, if you want to tell about your story, you have to think about that. Don't recite, because our brain reads faster anyway, the words, and we cannot process so many words. No rehearsing. I was with a Japanese client a while ago, and he was supposed to speak at TED. And before the presentation, I told him, okay, so by the end of next week, you have to rehearse at least 50 times. And he said, no, I will rehearse 200 times, which I think was much better. But every time you're presenting, you have to think about how you're projecting yourself to the audience, because there's some, habits that you're doing, there's some, feeling words that you're using that shouldn't be present in that presentation. But it's completely normal, because everybody's getting nervous, right? Because you're, offering yourself to the judgments of others when you're presenting. So it might be very hard to handle. But after a few times of practice and getting feedback, it gets better. So if you don't rehearse, it doesn't work well, so you have to practice and get some feedback. So these are the tools that today we talked about. Telling a good story takes preparation, crafting, and practice. But if you want to only remember 3 takeaways from today, it's about the audience, it's about the hook, and it's about simplifying your message. Thank you very much. So what I propose you to do now, you may leave if you want, if you have some business to run. I know you're very busy people. Or you can come here and we can have, if you have a few questions to ask me. Or we can play a game, which would be starting telling about SanDisk's story. So is there anyone who'd like to come on stage and tell about the story of SanDisk, and we can see what comes out? Or you can leave, or you can come and ask me questions. Any volunteer to come on stage? Or, yes, sir, do you want to?
No, I have a question.
Okay. Okay. So I'd rather have a small group here, people who have some questions, and if you want to, everyone who wants to gather and ask some questions, having a, yes.